Lloyd Brown, welcome to the stage.
Good afternoon, Steve.
It's your show, Why Wells Fail, soon to be refreshed.
It sound right, boy.
That's right.
Stay tuned to learn. So today we're talking about some things that we're talking about: shut-ins, pressure cooker. You know, we got this efficiency in drilling. You get a pad, and we're going to pop in 12 wells. A lot of efficiencies that happen there. Everything's drilled in. But what happens when they get those drilled and then they move on to the next pad, and the time it takes to get in there and then go to the next step with those? Something's going on. Some people think, all right, we got her shut in. All's good. Nothing's happening. But that's not true.
That is a correct statement. You know, it was the thing that was driving me crazy all the way back in 2016, 17. We kept talking about this parent-child issue. And the children wells never performed as good as the parent. And I was looking at it, and we were looking at the geology because, you know, the rock is your boss. It tells you everything you need to know. And it still had the same amount of hydrocarbon in it. And there was all of these, the impact of another frac hitting it and just these different components. But one thing nobody was looking at was the amount of time a well stayed shut in, or the plugs were in place and the fluid stayed behind the pipe without bringing the wells on. And so what we started looking at is what's happening, you know, and in the very first presentation we had a pressure cooker, and we're like, why do we cook really tough meat with a pressure cooker? And, you know, what you're doing is you've got temperature, and then you've got pressure, and pressure raises the boiling point of water. And so it allows, instead of 100 degrees C, it goes to 115 to 120 or 212 up if we're talking Fahrenheit. Well, the same thing's happening downhole, but a pressure cooker in your home adds about 15 PSI. Well, when we frack a well, we're doing it at thousands of PSI, 5, 6, 7,000. Like in the Haynesville, sometimes it's 12,000, 14,000. And we're putting all this immense pressure into the rock to crack it open, and we shut it in behind a plug, and it sits there. And it's got temperature, just like we have cooking meats. And then we have the function of time. And the longer that it's in there, the more greater the opportunity. And as we now know, the disruption of equilibrium is accelerated with those components, and time being one of the significant components. But no matter what, we've got a state of disruption that's wanting to work its way back into stasis or into equilibrium. And there was never prior to our protocols and our beliefs, there was never anybody looking at that impact, because it's hard to do in a laboratory. It's extremely dangerous when you start talking those kind of pressures. And so how do you replicate that gives you a protocol that helps you understand what happens? And, you know, we had a bunch of tests early on that we were creating, and we put it in this beaker, and we put the fluid in there, and we put a little pressure on it, and we let it set. And guess what happened?
Nothing.
It was a rock and water. But once we started realizing we needed the temperature and we needed to add the pressure components, time was just one of the functions. Then we started seeing these impacts, and it really started then just, you know, the rate of learning. Once you overcome that one big hill, you know, it starts going quicker, and we started learning more. And then, you know, just started asking one of the most powerful questions there is.
Why?
What if? What if? What if? You go to that imagination. What if we try this? What if we try that? We start the scientific method, the scientific process, and wow, what comes out of it is the Pathfinder process that is the only worldwide patented process on measuring the impact of fracking, and it's the method for measuring how much CO2 can be generated from this pressure cooker, how much H2S can be generated from this pressure cooker, and what happens to the geology. And then how do you keep that from happening? Well, we're the only company in the world that has the ability to do that. And because of, understanding all of the components that we were putting into the mix, into this pressure cooker, and then starting measuring which ones really had a positive and negative impact. Like, hey, the big word out today, Steve, by the way, is surfactant. I think we need to have a conversation, because what is old is new again. I feel like we're in 2016. Everybody's wanting to test surfactants. And, we went through this. There was a company called Flowtech, and they were all about, look at what our initial production was. They're the antithesis of who we are today. And, it was all about the surfactant. And guess what? In the right situation, they had a really, really good product, but they had a horrible process because they believed the one product was great everywhere. And it wasn't taking in to consideration the compounding effect of equilibrium and what we were doing in these wells. And so, I was reading a report from McKinsey that was talking about how do we get more out of type 2 rock now that we've almost produced all of the good type 1 rock in North America. And the answer is the Pathfinder process. And they were talking about what technologies would be implemented. And you know what? They don't have visibility to our technology. Guess who we're going to go talk to? They need to understand what we're doing, because we're having that next level step change that the industry is looking for to maximize resource potential.
So you think about then it just decide one day, hey, next week, let's go drill some wells, see what happens. There's a whole process of planning, organizing resources, hiring people, making drill plan, whatever they call it. And so they got all this going on. And then that one piece, we're going to shut her in. We did all this investment and work, hard work to get it to frack and open up all these cracks. And then you let them sit there. And what does it do? It undoes. The longer it sits there, it undoes all that work.
Yeah, it's funny. I was at the gym this morning, and a buddy of mine goes, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe your knee." And I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "You can't hardly even see your scar." And that's a function of healing over time. And a frack is a scar on the rock, and the rock wants to naturally heal that scar. And that's what equilibrium is. It's a very similar process. It's a metabolic process, not unlike what happens to us when we cut ourselves or we injure ourselves, we break a bone, whatever it is. There's this process, natural process of healing that takes place, and ultimately equilibrium is a healing process for geology wanting to go back to a place that it's normal, that it's stable, that it's not in transition. That's what elements especially like. And so that's where we really, have taken the level of what we're doing today, and are still learning. Every day we're learning something new. There's just amazing revelations that continue to come, and we're putting into the patent process because it's the gift that keeps on giving.
So we shut them in, they go to stasis, and then it tries to get back to equilibrium.
Well, no, stasis is equilibrium. It goes into disruption.
Okay.
So when we frack it, we've disrupted it.
And then it wants to swing back to the way it was. It wants to go
Right.
back.
It wants to go back into a place of equilibrium, which, by the way, it only took it millions of years to get there. And the impact that we see in days tells you the level of volatility and disruption that we put it in to make it want to go back so fast. And again, pressure is a lot of the equation, but then also the type of water we used, all of these different
Variables.
variables, 242 of them, as we know today,
Hmm.
come into
And
play.
so the Pathfinder process helps discern the variables at play and keep it in what's called dynamic equilibrium, where you have two opposing forces wanting to get back to the way they were. And dynamic equilibrium keeps it into I guess, a symphony or an equilibrium that's moving back and forth a little bit, dynamic.
It is.
But the Pathfinder process is keeping it to where all that work and investment is able to pay off over a long period of time, because that it wants to heal over the years, right?
Right. And that's ultimately closing the permeability of the rock, closing it up to where it does not have the ability to mobilize the hydrocarbon to the wellbore. And I love that picture you're giving of opposing forces, but we want one of them to win a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Reason we call it dynamic equilibrium, pure equilibrium, which we can do, wouldn't let any oil come out. Dynamic is, hey, we still want that water and we want that oil to come out, but we don't want all of the, we don't want the cookie to crumble like you stick your Oreo in the milk, and it all falls apart and makes your milk wonderful. We don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
We don't want
maybe an
clays.
example of something that makes me think, when's the last time I had an Oreo? When's the last time you had an Oreo?
I
But,
can't remember. It's too long.
It's a long time. I'm going to have to fix that. But that's ultimately, or your graham cracker, whatever you stick in your milk, it gets soggy, right? It gets soft. Same thing. And or if you're from England and it's your
Biscuit.
tea and crumpets, right, or a biscuit, we don't want that. But we do have things we want to get out of it, and that's the most simple way that I can explain it.
So when it's in there a long time, then the clays are starting to get soggy and swell. You're releasing fines and migrations, right?
Right.
You're releasing CO2, right?
That's
CO2
right.
and an H2S as well.
That's right.
That's a lot to manage and a lot to deal with if
it's all based on what your rock has. And so sometimes there's not a lot of pyrite, if any. So the H2S isn't a big deal, but usually in those cases, you have a lot of carbonate or you have a lot of clays. And there's all of these multiple mechanisms. It's like driving. My dad had a 1930, actually a 1923 Model T, and that thing had more controls. You had a spark control, you had ignition control, you had 3 different shifting mechanisms plus the fuel. You had all of these things that you had to manage and pull, and that's kind of where we are when it comes to mitigating the impacts of disruption. Is we've got a lot of levers, 5 that we know of right now, that we've got to be able to manage and pull to optimize that well to produce.
And the water helps us know which lever to lean on.
That's right. The water's it's just like the blood for a human, tells us how healthy we are, tells us, what our workout regimen is doing. Is the cholesterol getting better? What are the bad actors that we have in there? Do we have different, what's our AC1? For folks that have had trouble controlling their sugar and have watched all these TV ads, right?
Mm.
All the things that you're watching on TV that are wrong with people, we're measuring a very similar type of occurrence on an oil and gas well.
So before you begin the process, you go in and you take some samples, and that's where you're able to develop a well plan, right?
That's right.
And then from there, you're able to be aware of what variables of the 242 variables that are potentially in play. We're able to address them, and over 3 years, the upswing of this is significant.
Yeah, it's greater than 40%, and in some basins like the Eagle Ford, it's greater than 60% improvement over 36 months. And it's not just on one well; it's on every well that uses our process. And then, one of which statistically is unbelievable. It's very rare that you see something applied that it's, there's not two or three occurrences that's not true. In the Eagle Ford, it's never been true. Now, we've seen in the Permian Basin, in one area, there's been 2 wells out of 116 refined wells that underperformed to the baseline standard. 2 out of 116. Again, statistically very relevant. So, and when we're looking at those, one of the things is it was just really not very good geology. And sometimes that's the case. You got bad rock, and you can't get good oil out of bad rock. So, but you can get more oil out of good rock. It's just, it's one of those things. If you don't know what you have, how do you know what you need? How do you know what you need to do to get it?
Well, if someone's been listening to this, Lloyd, they want to talk to you. What's that look like?
Well, scan that QR code here on our page, and that'll take you to our website. And there's several contact us buttons all over our website, and any of those will get you to us. And you can go to @RefineCLloydB here on LinkedIn and on X and YouTube. And then if you want to just reach out directly, it's lloyd.brown@refinecompletions.com. And then, of course, our website, refinecompletions.com.
Man, you're like a pro at this stuff. You done this before?
Practice. We're the anti-Allen Iverson. Every day we're just practicing to get a little bit better.
Just a little bit better.
Most people are like, Allen who? Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. All right, Lloyd Brown, why wells don't fail. That's not the name of the new show. Why wells fail, soon to be refreshed with the outcome that you desire. Reach out to Lloyd, get connected, have that discussion, change the future of your business. Good job today, Lloyd.
Thank you, Steve. Enjoyed it as always.
All right, and that's a wrap.